of fentanyl. Now, to you and me, that just means a whole bunch of nothing. But to people who are in the rehab world, that is sent shivers through the rehab community. Percy Menzies is a good friend of the show, and he owns ARCA. Sunil is his son, joins us from time to time. Sunil Menzies, welcome back to the Big 550 KTRS.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you?
Good. So explain to everybody what 27 kilos of pure fentanyl is and what does that mean?
So 27 kilos of fentanyl, the lethal dose of fentanyl is 2 to 3 milligrams. And fentanyl is a highly potent synthetic opiate, which is primarily used in hospital settings or after hospital settings for pain management. But it's 2 to 3 milligrams is the lethal dose. This is 27 kilograms of pure fentanyl. That's 27 million milligrams. That 27 kilos can be hidden in a suitcase, essentially. That dose that was seized back in April is lethal enough to kill 900,000 people. 900,000 people.
So this was pure fentanyl, and so they then, but it wasn't planning on going to Los Angeles or New York. Its final destination, the feds are saying, was here in St. Louis.
Yeah, that's what they believe, and you know, kudos to the DEA who had been keeping their eye and tracking these individuals and this drug, because had this hit, which fentanyl, of course, has already hit the streets of St. Louis, the vast majority of heroin now that's being kind of distributed around the Midwest. And Ohio is called for a state of emergency. Virginia is called for a state of emergency. These areas are getting hit with heroin that is cut with fentanyl. And fentanyl is, they say 7 to 10, 50 times more powerful than your normal street heroin, to the point that when first responders are coming on the scene, we've seen incidences where the first responder is kind of passing out and being affected by it just from smelling the fumes.
Yeah, that terrible story a couple days ago. This happened in April. You're on the front lines of this every day. Did you see anything change? Was it harder to find heroin? Was it harder to get a hold of things after this bust? Or did you not even notice that the supply was there and ready, willing, and able to meet the demand?
Yeah, we haven't seen anything change, McGraw. Part of what we also do is we run transitional living and sober support houses for men who struggle with this. And it's becoming more and more difficult to treat patients because fentanyl doesn't register on a normal drug test. You don't see it show up as an opiate. There has to be a specific special test done for it. But we've seen that the overdose rates continue to climb. Last year, 700 people in the greater St. Louis area died from quote-unquote opiate overdose. This year, however, we continue just to see it rise. On Saturday, we had someone who came to us and her brother had overdosed. And when he went to the hospital, they realized it was fentanyl. The problem with the fentanyl is there's a drug that's being used and being passed around called Narcan, which is the reversal for opiates.
Right.
There's a lot of different opinions about it, but based on the landscape that we're in right now, a pretty good idea for families and patients and people who are struggling or know someone who's struggling with it to be armed with it. But the dose of fentanyl is so potent that the normal dose of Narcan doesn't even work to wake you up. But we've not seen any slowdown. The heroin is rampant. The opiate epidemic it's a generational crisis. It is time. You and I have talked about it, McGraw. It's time that we're getting to a point where someone needs to be calling this a serious epidemic, a major health crisis, to the point that we are saying it's a state of emergency. We're seeing more people die from opiate overdose than we are from homicides.
Sunil, 27 kilos of fentanyl. Is there a street value on that you can put a number on?
They in terms of the street value, we don't know because it's still cut with, it oftentimes is cut with the heroin. But what we can say is we've seen that the buttons of what they call a bean or a button of heroin has increased a little bit in certain parts of St. Louis. Normally what might be $6 to $7 to $8 could now be $8, $9, $10. Coming from China, which is where we believe the bulk of this is coming from now, because it is fairly simple to make, being that it's a synthetic. The price, they're able to keep it down quite a bit. And so in terms of driving, which we know price and availability drive the product, we're not seeing a huge spike in the overall price of the drug.
You're right. States of emergency have been called in other states. This 27 kilos of fentanyl that was obtained, taken off the streets in Ferguson, you haven't heard anything about it anywhere, about it at all in the region.
No, it's crazy. And whether we're not at a whether it's just something that we don't talk about because it stays within the families, whether it's because it still is something that society is scared about, it's socially unacceptable, it is something that has not been talked about. And we are losing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people, 18, 20, 24, and of course it affects the elders too, but hundreds and hundreds of people in our area, and we are not talking about it. It's making the front page of the New York Times. It's making the headlines on CBS Evening News. But in terms of our own local community, we have not stepped up yet to say that this is truly a state of emergency in terms of a health epidemic.
Unbelievable. Sunil Menzies with us, program director at ARCA. Sunil, what's the latest at ARCA? Can you give us any good news?
Yeah, people continue to get well. You know, science has been able to provide some really great alternatives and great options in terms of treatment. From a scientific standpoint, we're really being able to see the world of addiction come into mainstream medicine. ARCA has been really fortunate to have the support and the ability to partner with the Department of Mental Health, which has really done a phenomenal job out of the amazing thing here, McGraw, is that our state is in such trouble, but we still don't rank as one of the top 3 anymore. And that's partly, in fact, to really our Department of Mental Health, which I have to give credit to in terms of really keeping their eye on the problem, tackling this head on, meeting the opiate crisis where it is. Had we not had the support, the funding, the ability to treat and to provide services throughout the state of Missouri to as many people that receive it, it's not surprising that St. Louis would be right behind Ohio at number 2 in terms of mortality rates. So, good. On the bright side, there is options, there is hope, there is life beyond this. But unless we talk about it, unless we get the problem out, unless the stigma, the fear is broken down and people are willing to come forth and say, this is my story, this is what's happening to my family, once we start the conversation, I'm going to continue to read stories like this.
Sunil Menzies, thanks for checking in and thanks for the insight. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Sunil Menzies with ARCA. ARCAMidwest.com is the website if you know someone who is suffering or needs some help. 27 kilos of pure fentanyl was taken by the feds back in April. According to Sunil, that's overdoses that could be that's 900,000 fatal overdoses of fentanyl. 900,000. And they found it in April. And, oh, by the way, the front lines say it didn't put a dent in the supply. So that's got to be even scarier. 727, big